98% of Gen Z workers are actively dealing with burnout. That's not a minority anymore. That's basically all of us. And when three-quarters of hiring managers label us as the most difficult generation in the workforce, it's easy to dismiss it as another round of kids these days are lazy. But here's what I keep coming back to. When half of Gen Z is working 3 or more jobs just to survive, while facing historic housing prices and record levels of student debt, what else are employers expecting? It's almost like we're supposed to be grateful just for the opportunity to struggle. There's this narrative that Gen Z is lazy, entitled, whiny. I get it, every generation says that about the one coming up. But what that narrative gets wrong is almost everything. The reality behind those labels doesn't recognize that the issues being faced aren't new. Every emerging generation throughout recent history has felt similar pressures. The difference is this: Gen Z didn't just inherit personal struggles. We inherited decades of economic and social neglect that we never asked for. We're not just trying to overcome our own pressures, we're trying to overcome the leftover consequences of decisions we didn't make. So, what is burnout actually? It's not just being tired. I talked to Chris Dorado, a clinical psychotherapist with over 30 years of experience, and he explained it in a way that made everything click. He works with younger clients constantly, he's an empowerment coach at the University of Texas, and he's watching this unfold in real time. Here's what he told me. Burnout happens when we put ourselves into life with the idea that we're going to be appreciated, that our work is going to pay off, that the people around us or our work will show us value. And when that doesn't happen, when we're asked for too much or given too little recognition, that's when everything starts to collapse. What Chris is describing is what happens when the fundamental agreement breaks down. The agreement is supposed to be work hard, be responsible, follow the rules, and you'll have security. A home, healthcare, dignity. That's the deal older generations were sold. And for a lot of them, that deal actually worked, at least partially. In 1972, you could work a minimum wage job or have a union job and have real buying power. You could make decisions about your life, buy a home, get a car, pay for college, provide for a family. People weren't lying awake at night wondering how they were going to survive. They were thinking about who they wanted to be. That was the luxury they had, the mental space to wonder about their own identity. But something happened between then and now. The economy didn't just shift, it shattered. There's this study from 1982, the New York Times article The Baby Boom Comes of Ages, where a labor economist named Pat Walsh is predicting the baby boom's future. He says their progress just won't match their parents. And here's the wild part. He was right. But what's fascinating is how the boomers responded. They started redefining what success actually means. Instead of just climbing the corporate ladder, they started asking, what about personal fulfillment? What about having control over your own future? What about psychological success in terms of your own value system? They were the first generation to really push back and say, maybe moving up in the organization isn't the only way to win. And you know what? That was radical. It still is. But here's the catch. Gen Z didn't get that choice. We were told to redefine success while simultaneously not being able to afford the basics. You can't philosophize about fulfillment when rent is consuming half your income. And parents? God, parents are struggling too. They see their kids drowning and they're trying to help, but they're helpless. Parents are now providing record levels of financial support to adult children. We're talking about half of all parents still paying for an adult child, averaging about $1,474 a month. But here's what's missing: emotional support for how to actually navigate this, how to stay human while the system slowly erodes that humanity. Let's go back to what Chris said about burnout. When you're in that space where you start feeling helpless or hopeless, that's not weakness. That's your system telling you something is broken. Chris described what he's seeing with Gen Z clients. I don't even have a moment to sit around and ponder what it is that I want to do. I just have to go figure something out. And here's the part that hit me hardest. I don't even know what is it that I'm supposed to figure out. It's this exhausting cycle where you have to be in action all the time, but the action itself is meaningless because you're too busy surviving to know who you even are. You're on a treadmill, moving fast but going nowhere. That's burnout. It's not about working hard, it's about working hard without knowing why, or for what, or who you're supposed to become. You're running on a machine that was designed by people who don't care if you fall off. And that's what leaves out the human element. Chris put it perfectly. When you skip the time that young people need to really understand who they are and how they can make a difference in the world, you're not building future leaders or fulfilled people, you're building workers. You're creating people who are too tired to think critically, too anxious to dream, and too trapped to rebel. That's the real danger. It's not that Gen Z is burned out, it's that we're being systematized into burnout before we even get a chance to figure out who we are, and that's a real loss of our humanity. When Chris does family sessions, he sees a pattern. Parents come in with incredibly high expectations. I was able to make it work and figure it out. How come you can't? And parents, they're not trying to be cruel, they're genuinely confused because they did pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But here's what they're forgetting, or maybe just not seeing, is that bootstraps don't exist anymore. The ground has shifted completely beneath them. In 1972, you could bootstrap your way. You had wages that matched inflation. You had access to housing. You had pension systems that actually worked. Now you're bootstrapping on quicksand. Parents are caught between two realities: the one they lived in, where effort did equal reward, and the one their kids are living in, where effort mostly equals exhaustion. And they can't reconcile those two truths. So they project the first one onto their kids, creating this impossible expectation. If I did it, you should be able to do it. But you can't, and that blame becomes internalized. The reality is that parents are feeling as much helplessness as their kids, they just don't talk about it. They're trying to make sure their children have everything they need to live in a world that demands more and more every day. College is now more elite and infinitely more expensive than most adults have ever seen. Parents are trying to comprehend costs that are almost incomprehensible. And what Chris told me in those sessions is crucial. Even if your children are capable, even if they're smart and talented, they're still going to need help. A lot of help. Scaffolding. Support. The world isn't built to let you succeed alone anymore. And when parents accept that, the dynamic changes. It becomes less about blame and more about survival. Less about why can't you manage, and more about how do we manage this together. But there's something that's been stripped out completely, and Chris really nailed this: the creative, intuitive, and loving part of being human. When we're focused entirely on survival and metrics and productivity, we forget that being human is actually about creating, about expressing, about connecting. Rock and roll wasn't invented because it was efficient. It was created because a generation needed to say something about who they were in the world. Music, dance, poetry, art making, these aren't distractions from life. They're actually how we understand ourselves and how we communicate our place in the world. And when we take away that space for creativity, we're not just removing a hobby, we're removing a way of knowing ourselves. We're removing rebellion. We're removing meaning. Gen Z is supposed to find that creative voice. They're supposed to figure out who they are through expression, not through Excel spreadsheets and quarterly reviews. But instead, we're telling them, be creative on your own time, after you finish your 3 jobs and pay your student loans. That's not sustainable. And deep down, I think everyone knows that. We know that systems designed around maximum extraction can't coexist with human thriving. You can't ask someone to be creative, vulnerable, and authentic while simultaneously telling them their worth is determined by their productivity. Those things are in direct conflict. Chris talked about finding that creative way to be in the world even when the practical reality is bleak, even when everything rational tells you to give up. There's something almost radical about choosing to stay human while the system is designed to make you mechanical, to stay loving when you're being exploited, to stay creative when you're being standardized. That's the real resistance, and that's exactly what Gen Z is trying to do, even if they don't always have language for it. And here's what we have to be honest about, is the systems that are supposed to support us aren't. Not just failing to help, actively not working. Throughout 2020, we saw it all laid bare. Every system designed to serve us completely failed. Government mismanagement, corporate indifference, healthcare systems overwhelmed, education systems struggling, the social safety net that's supposed to catch people was full of holes. And what happened after that? We kind of all decided to just accept it. Secretly, we know it's wrong, but collectively, we've decided to move on, to pretend it's normal. But here's what's being lost in that acceptance. A generation is growing up learning that the systems in place can't be trusted, that the government won't protect them, that corporations won't support them, that the things built to help us are failing us across the board. And you can't build a functional society on that foundation. You can't tell young people, work hard, follow the rules, trust the system, and then fail to deliver on that promise. The consequences of that broken promise aren't just financial, they're spiritual. Believe it or not, Chris still has faith in humanity. Even after 30 years of watching people struggle, he still believes that at our deepest center, we know we have to help each other to survive. And that's not naive. That's spiritual. Not religious necessarily, but spiritual in the sense that we know, unconsciously even, that part of being alive is about giving to each other. That's the real foundation. Not profit, not metrics, not growth. Giving. Understanding our power to help each other. And when systems become so extractive that they prevent us from helping one another, when they design the structure so that most of us are too exhausted to care about anyone but ourselves, that's when the system has truly failed. Because it's failed at the most basic level, it's failed to let us be human. Here's where it gets interesting, though. Young people are starting to realize something. They've grown up with unprecedented access to information. They've been told, this is how the world works. Follow the rules. Here's what you need to do. But then they have the entire knowledge of humanity in their pocket. They can fact check everything. And they're realizing, a lot of what I was taught isn't accurate. Conversations with older people who are supposed to have it figured out reveal that nobody actually has it figured out. Not the boomers, not the Gen X, not the millennials. And that's both terrifying and liberating. When you realize that the people in charge are just as confused as you are, you have two choices: give up and accept the chaos, or start asking critical questions. Gen Z is increasingly doing the latter. They're saying, you're all making this up as you go, and you're doing it badly. So why should we accept your framework? Why should we play by rules you're breaking? Why should we believe in systems that are visibly failing? And that's not entitlement, that's clarity. There's a natural cycle. Every generation that comes of age speaks up about what's happening. That's not a bug, it's a feature. That's how we evolve. But every time we chop down that voice, every time we dismiss it as kids these days, we're teaching the next generation something dangerous. There is no point in speaking up. There is no hope for change. If you continuously tell young people that their concerns don't matter, that their exhaustion is their fault, that they should just deal with it like you did, you're not building resilience. You're building learned helplessness. And those kids grow up, become parents, and they teach their kids the same thing. The cycle becomes, yeah, the future is bleak, and there's nothing we can do about it, so why bother trying? And that's the real tragedy. That's where hope dies. Not in individual burnout, not in economic hardship, but in the collective decision that things can't get better. When we silence the generation that's supposed to challenge the status quo, we're not protecting the status quo. We're ensuring it will get worse. Let me tell you a story that illustrates everything. Chris was at this place called Dan's Hamburgers in Austin. Old hamburger stand. Not fancy. And he noticed an elderly couple. They looked like they were in their late 80s, maybe 90, sitting at the table next to him. All they were talking about was how expensive the hamburgers had gotten. And at first that seems like a trivial complaint, right? But Dan's is literally one of the cheapest places you can get a hamburger in Austin. It's a diner. So here's an elderly couple, sitting at the cheapest option available, and they're saying, I can't afford this anymore. And then you listen to Gen Z saying, I can't afford rent. I can't afford healthcare. I can't afford school. I can't afford to live. And technically they're saying different things, but they're saying the exact same thing. The same fundamental thing. The cost of existence has exceeded our purchasing power. We're being priced out of the world. And I think that's what most people aren't understanding yet. The disconnect isn't about generations wanting different things. It's that we're all experiencing economic pressure that's increasing across the board. The elderly couple and Gen Z are saying the same thing, but nobody's listening because they're not using the same language. And here's where it gets important. In most discussions people are having, in most outcomes, it's almost impossible for people to understand that they're saying the same thing. We're so locked into our generational identity, so committed to the idea that the other generation is wrong, that we miss the obvious. We're all getting squeezed. And if you're a young person experiencing all of this time throughout school being told this is how things are, and then you have access to the greatest information in human history, hopefully it's true information, you start recognizing that a lot of what you learned isn't accurate. You're having conversations and realizing at a quicker pace that older people don't have it figured out either. And honestly, that's the most important realization of this generation. We all improvise. We're all just doing our best, and that's kind of the most human thing there is. There was a burger place here in Austin called Mad Dog and Beans, and it became notorious for something. UT graduates with master's degrees in physics and mathematics were working there. These weren't people without options. These were credentialed, educated people who just wanted to kind of hang out and be in life. They wanted time to think, to explore, to exist without the pressure of climbing something. And that tells you everything about what's broken. When people with advanced degrees in STEM fields choose burger flipping over traditional careers, you don't have a motivation problem. You have a systemic problem. The jobs that are available either demand so much for so little, or they extract so much of your humanity that the trade-off doesn't feel worth it anymore. These physics and math graduates weren't lazy. They were making a rational calculation. I would rather have my time and my sanity than chase the career that I was supposedly trained for. And that's happening everywhere now. People at every level starting to opt out because the deal is broken. But here's the thing. That's not happening as much anymore. The pressure's gotten tighter, the economy's tightened, and now you don't have that option. You have to work the job that doesn't serve you. You have to climb the ladder that's crumbling, and you have to smile while you do it. So what does this all mean? Why am I telling you this? Because right now, in this moment, we're at a crossroads. We can keep pretending that the burnout, the exhaustion, the hopelessness is an individual problem. That if you're tired, you're not trying hard enough. That if you're struggling, it's because you don't have the right mindset. That if you're depressed about the future, you just need to think positive thoughts. Or we can be honest. 98% of Gen Z is burned out because something is fundamentally broken, and it's not them. And if we don't recognize that, if we don't actually change what's broken, that 98% becomes tomorrow's parents, teaching their kids that the future is hopeless. And that's not a future, that's a funeral. But here's what Chris wants you to know, and I want to know it too. Give yourself permission to understand that you are enough. Right now, as you are. That doesn't mean you don't keep working on things. That doesn't mean you give up on growth. It means you understand that you don't have to do anything more than what you're doing right now to have value. You don't have to earn worthiness. You're already worthy. And if you're someone who's feeling lost in a system that wasn't built for you, if you're exhausted by expectations you never agreed to, if you're tired of climbing a ladder that doesn't go anywhere, I want you to know that feeling is valid. That exhaustion is real. And it's not because you're not trying hard enough. It's because what you're trying to climb was designed to exhaust you. And maybe that's the moment where you start asking different questions. Maybe that's when you start thinking about what it means to be human in a system that's designed to extract your humanity. So if this resonates, if you feel like there's something broken that nobody wants to talk about, please subscribe. I'm here to talk about the things that matter, like what it actually means to build a life instead of just survive one. What we have to realize, what you have to realize, is that it is unacceptable that 98% of Gen Z workers are already burned out. That's not a sign of laziness. That's not a sign of entitlement. That's not something you fix by telling someone to pull themselves up by their bootstraps or by saying, back in my day. That's a sign that things are not working. It's a sign that our government is not supporting us. Our corporations are not supporting us. The systems that are literally built to support us are failing to do so. And when we reframe Gen Z, when we reframe young people in general, not as a problem to be fixed, but as people trying to rebuild and reform a system that isn't serving anyone, everything changes. When we admit that the system and the government and these institutions aren't helping us across the board, that's when we stop blaming individuals and start asking real questions. What would it look like if systems actually supported human flourishing instead of human extraction? What would change if we prioritized creativity, connection, and community over metrics and growth? What would happen if we said to a young person, "You're enough, your creativity matters, your voice matters, your existence matters. I don't have all the answers, but I do know this: hope is possible, change is possible, and it starts with speaking truth about what's broken." Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. I'll see you next time.